So hi everybody and welcome back. Sometimes I've been asked how can I fix the donor kit for my conversion. As you know, I have a line of resin conversion where mostly are indicated for the bodies of the vehicles, so very often you can find that I just provide the body, and also recently also the wheels, because I find this I think is a very cool way to provide the spare wheels, for our models. Those are samples that I use for my own builds. When you make a production of resin cast, there is always something that is probably at the end of the mold and is the last production. So I usually make a big selection of what I made, and I try to sell every time the best items, in my opinion, or the stuff that anyway the modeler can fix quite easy, with minor problems. It's quite typical, for example, with a very thin resin. If you look at my production, this is the level of my resin, so they are extremely thin compared to other companies. For example, this one, even if this is a material, this is incredibly much more thicker and much more flashes all over, so it's a little bit more problematic. But if you look at my production, usually they come in this way, and I think all the guys that took my models been very satisfied from the quality of the cast, because it's my point is constantly to have something that resemble the plastic model kit to what they are proposed to be the substitution parts. So my kit usually is basically the body and the wheels, and the most important parts, remaining all the rest of the part, to something that I use to call the donor kit. The donor kit is a definition that is coming from the car replica world, where, for example, where they build it up. I remember in the beginning of my journey, when I chose my name in GT40's model work, I was so much inside the GT40's, the replicas, as well as for the Cobras, provided by Superformance, for example. And very often they use it to have donor parts coming from the production, because if they try to copy, like we do in scale, we try to copy the real racer. Of course, there is many parts that are specific for racers, and that's why usually you can do this stuff mostly with old-fashioned racers cars coming from the 60s and the 70s, but already starting from the prototype era or the silhouette era, that becomes incredibly much more harder because the car became too much different from the series production. So that's why I use this donor terminology to explain what I mean for. And when I mean that for my here I use the example of the last R7 that I just made in these days, and is the same identical idea and concept that you can apply to my previous 3.3 liter RSR 1974, or the even before kit that I made about this version, that was the R6 car, so it was the long tail that I made in the Viceroy tobacco livery, and when I mean a donor kit, being all those racer kind of racing Porsches, you can not start from the nicest model around of the Porsche. That usually I consider the nicest model around about the 911, the one produced by Tamiya. In general they are the best ever, but very often, because the period and the era is very similar to the Fujimi enthusiast model produced around the I think it was the early 90s where they started to do that type of kit. And the point is only one, that I basically, as you noticed, produce racing cars. So what we need inside this model is a racing interior. There are not so many racers around dedicated to this type of effort, because they have to be still in the category of racer that have something in common with the production series, like those 911 of the early 70s had. It was really the turning point of the production when they switched from cars modified for races like the Targa Florio, also the Nürburgring and so on, and then became real prototypes. This was really the last step before the 911 became 935 and so on. So about modeling stuff, I always consider like a donor kit. You can use basically whatever you want to have a donor for this car, but remember that the racers usually had a stripped down completely interior, a simplified seat. Very often they just feature a single seat for the pilot and nearly never the secondary seat. They don't have the rear the rear seat, for example, is completely taken away because that was just weight over the racer. So we need something that is resembling that type of creation of the real car. And what I absolutely indicate it is something that when I started all this journey about the body of the Porsches with the first 3-liter RSR that I made, now I think about 11 or 12 years ago, the first one, the gray model that I made, that was a conversion that I started sorry, from the 935 from the 935 from Tamiya. Was the only body that I started and could modify. At the time they didn't exist, the 934, they didn't exist nearly any of the modern racers that we have on the market produced by Revell, Fujimi, Tamiya and so on. So that's why for my racers I constantly indicate when people ask me which is the best donor around, and as I said, if you have the fantasy and the ability to make it, you can do basically with every kind of Porsche, basically Porsche of the period. Of course, if you take a 993 Porsche, is a little bit complicated, because I mean, anyway, the hub inside the 993 is anyway similar, you know, the disposition of the metal plate on the floors and the metal stuff under. Basically it is like in the rear car, still coming from the series of the ordinary 911. But if you want to have something that is a little better, more matching the period of the car, being a car of 1976, I think you can use basically the 934, being the Tamiya 934 absolutely the nicest around. You know, Tamiya in my heart always have a step forward to all the other. I hope the guys at Revell, I think they never see my videos, but I hope the guys at Revell will not have anything against me. But you know, if there is always something to change between Revell and Tamiya, I always suggest to use a Tamiya. The point is that unfortunately with the recently changing around the world and about the delivery of the materials and so on, in Europe the Tamiya kits becomes a little more tricky to find around. So if you are located in Asia, Vietnam, China, Japan, Hong Kong and so on, and you are watching this video, Australia the same, probably in your local store or in your online store you can find much better bargain over the Tamiya parts. Maybe also in America it is the same, you know. Here in Europe usually the Tamiya models state about double the price that you can pay in the other side of the world. That's why usually to keep a donor for a Tamiya part you can easily spend between 50 to 60 euros or something like that. That's why very often I suggest to use this type of model. This is probably the less interesting model made by Revell because it doesn't resemble at all a real car racing. This is indicated like Porsche 934 RSR Martini, and it probably wanted to try to copy in the fantasy war that they did at the time. This was a kit that they made in 2019, so they neither have the alibi to say no, this was old stuff. So you know, this was a clear mistake because they tried to copy what was the livery of the 3-liter RSR used in the historic classic Grand Prix in Germany. So it's German car that is seen around, but the body is totally different. It was not a 934, it was an RSR, so it was an ordinary 3-liter, not a turbo car, so completely different body. But you know, probably for the market experts of Revell it could be absolutely the same, and so they decide to provide this type of car that, despite is quite cool, you know, she never existed. If you Google for a real image, or if a real racer of this Martini, never will arrive a 934 RSR, never ever, neither in today's refurbished car, if not some photoshops or video games stuff. So that's why I suggest to use this Revell box, because very often the expert and the people that is car enthusiast well know about what I am just telling you about the not existing of this model, and that's why this specifically box from Revell usually have the lowest value on the market. Even more if you did like I do, and sometimes this game doesn't pay so well, you know, to play easy, and to try to go even more cheaper than what it is. This is a model that usually in Europe you can get around 30 euros or something like that. But if you want to go even more cheaper, and I think so, you know, because considering for a donor purpose you will never end the original model of Revell. If you are looking this kind of stuff, this is the ordinary body molded in white, you know, that they provide inside those boxes. They also make, I think, the Jägermeister and the Weiland cars. So Jägermeister and Weiland are real livery that they have been used, but the third one absolutely is not. So there is absolutely no use for this stuff, and when you go for it, you just use the interior part. Let's have a close look to what I did to the interior part to fit inside the body of my R7 resin kit. Try to place it in the background so we always keep her in mind. So what basically I did, it was to following the instruction, you know, it is just is a temporary fixing. So when I do temporary fixing, I use drops or really points of drop off. This is the Svenska Lim. This is a Swedish kind of chownacrylate that you can find in ordinary shops, very cheap and extremely good quality. Also because they provide small cans of glue that every time, I think it's a 3 gram, every time remains fresh, so you don't have the cyanoacrylate that became a little bit jelly and loses the power to be sticky at once, you know. And you just fix it with little drops, and you can go to make a temporary fixing like I usually did. So if you go fixing with the ordinary green Tamiya glue or with the ordinary Revell needle glue, that is this one, this is a definitive fixing because they basically melt the plastic. Instead, if you go with, I mean, again, points, drops, really points, and I use usually a toothpick to do this kind of job, you know. You just point it to make a temporary fixing, and this is basically what you get. So basically you get all the interior part, because, you know, the leftover that you have from this box is basically the main body that you can use for other projects or whatever. And the wheels that, as you can see from this image that they have here, they are absolutely, they're probably the worst point ever in the Revell kit, you know. They use quite thick plastic, but that is not such a big problem. They have a little leak of detail, so it's of course a second choice if you really want to do a 934. I took a branch of it because I use just like donor kits. This is the meaning of donor when I give the definition for that in my production. And as you can see here, I made just a temporary stuff because I want to keep all this stuff with me. I have to travel with this model because soon I will move again to Sweden. I spend the winter there, so this will be a production that I will do in the winter time to finish completely my demo car of the R7, you know. But you basically have everything, and everything is temporary fixed, you know. But as you can see, basically you have an excellent donor for the engine part, and in my model they will be closer, so I will not show it so much, the presence of, I think it was a 2.7 or a 2.8 liter engine, you know. But anyway, inside the Revell kit, one of the very good plus, it was that they provide a full, quite decently reproduction of the engine that, for example, in the Tamiya model you don't have, despite the Tamiya parts are usually little much nicer detailed than this one. Then you have, of course, to make a proper fitting, you know, of the plastic parts, and I usually keep a Dremel or a mini drill to do this stuff with a micro saw and keep it in the proper proportion. Here I also made a mistake because I took it away part of the front wings. Part of the front wing that was honestly not so necessary, and every time you have to consider a kind of fitting of the ordinary body. And let's see what happens when we try to fit the ordinary body. I usually fit in every time that I do for my 911, starting from the back. I hope that you can see what I'm doing with one hand, this way, and then you fit it inside. This is basically what you get at the end. Then, of course, the position of the wheels, those are also the wheels. These are just spare parts of items that I will not sell, you know, so I keep it for my production because they require a little more deeper cleaning, you know, in the parts. But as you can see, the fitting is, there is still no suspension, there is not anything, you know. I'm just placed a temporary pin to have the position of the wheels, mostly to see if the wheelbase is centered to what I did, you know, because despite they are all 911 in 124, sometimes from company to company they have slightly difference, you know. But this type of wheelbase you can also game a little with the moving of the chassis of some millimeter back and forward, so it's not so dramatical. The fixing is not so stuck like inside the ordinary plastic kit, so you have to game a little around this position, you know. As well as from the front end, you know, I still keep the details here, the air ducts coming from the originally 934, but of course they are basically in the same position, you see. So it means that they made a proper work because they are in the same position of the ordinary RSR up there. So basically that air duct for the brakes you can also keep because it's a detail more, despite when the model will be completed and with the wheel hover you will not see so much about that. But that's so simple and so easy, and for me this is absolutely one of the easiest and cheapest way ever to have a proper donor, you know. Remember that also in Revell kit they have this quite heavy double line for the fitting of the transparent part all over the cockpit shell, so you have the front window that is settled in that way. Instead here, coming from a Tamiya original donor, they were set at the original part that I worked was a Tamiya and Fujimi part, so you have to make a proper setting of the front windshield and also of the rear windshield. In my box, this box that I bought from Amazon was a damaged box, so it was completely smashed, and thanks God just a part of the model was completely cracked. You know, part of this one was the rear windshield, you know. But I have not so much problem because the rear windshield you cannot do so much. Just remember that those parts in the 911 are unless the 961 where they were exactly at the level of the glass here, they were always fitting inside exactly like in the ordinary street car. So this is basically what do you have to do to have a proper donor cockpit interior. And for what? For in Amazon with the Prime services and so on, I think I paid this stuff 15 euros. So for 15 euros you neither buy usually a set of wheels, you know, neither a set of tires usually for this type of model. Then of course also the front mirror, as I say, this is just a temporary stuff, because if I want to go on and finish properly the model with the details, seat belts, the fire extinguisher and all the gouges inside the cockpit, you have to go deeper in modifying the cockpit. So all this part, all the roll cage is just a temporary fix. Even more when you study carefully the lines of the roll cage, very often the roll bar is just basically looking the same, you know, but sometimes they have a different line, especially in the backyard, especially in the second part and in the second sector of the car. As you can see here, of course, that is something that also you can create. That's why I say from the beginning you can also use an ordinary 911 donor body. This part you have to create by your own, so it's a little work more. I mean, if you don't have it and for you it's not such a big issue to grab something like that, you can go for absolutely a Revell donor kit. This was a video that have to be an explainer on how to do it when I mentioned the donor, you know, because very often, you know, also the guys looking at the period in social media, they ask me why can't we use the, for example, the 2.1 RSR Turbo Martini provided by Fujimi. That is an excellent kit, one of the best ever, but the 2.1 was a big racer, so you don't have the complete interior, you had just part of it because the car was completely closed in the back and the engine and the air intake, so it was hugely modified. So all this part in the rear car was different, was missing. They had a much higher intercooler, so it was slightly different. And usually, as I used to say, exactly for the Tamiya kits, also the Fujimi box is usually being so beautiful, it's quite more expensive than an ordinary crap made by Revell. With all the respect from Revell, they do great models, you know. The quality of what you pay for, in my opinion, is one of the best ever. They just have to deal, and I also noted that this working on this part of the body, that for ecological rules that we have today in everything that we do, from the car, from the what you eat, from when you die, it have to be ecological, it have to be green and ambient friendly. So they basically work with recycled plastic. That's why, for example, this ugly mold is molded in an ugly plastic, and neither Aishi in the 70s had so ugly. More, the quality of the plastic of Aishi was a first quality class plastic. This is a third, if not fifth quality plastic, because the chemical production of recycled plastic, Revell constantly work with recycled plastic, is absolutely garbage. So it's very, very easy to melt at once. The fusion point when you drill it is extremely low, so just also with few rounds on the mini drill you are already melting the parts. It's really like a kind of soft rubber, so it's absolutely ugly to work with. And I hope that in the future, at least for this small production, they will choose something in a slightly better quality. This happens even more with the silver plastic. Thanks God, happens something less with the black plastics and the white plastic. So that's just my opinion, you know. So the leftover parts is just this. I still didn't use this stuff because those are specifically from the 934 turbo car. So that is the turbo exit from the exhaust of the car, and that is the line of the 6-in-1 that they used to do with the ordinary car. Instead, the ordinary RSR had a different exhaust line, and they featured two different mufflers and silencer coming outside from the rear of the car. That's it, guys. I hope we understand finally what I mean like a donor kit, and I hope this video helps you in the building of one of my production, or whatever you want to do in the same identical way with the racing body that I have to fix over a donor. If it is a racing donor of the 70, for me the best choice ever will be this beep produced by Revell. That's it. Thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next one. Peace.